What's the plan, person? Welcome back.
CyberSpace.
Empirical training. Do you know what I mean? So they're like empirical training.
Welcome back to the CyberSpace podcast by Empirical Training. It's great to have you back with us again. If you don't know who Empirical Training are, if this isn't you coming back for the podcast, this is your first time, then you've stumbled upon something quite special. If you're interested in cybersecurity, if you want to get into cybersecurity especially, because that is really what we're trying to do by sharing our experiences and our knowledge and just making it a little bit more accessible and interesting. Or if you're trying to advance your career as well, those three camp buckets: people want to get better at security, want to stay more private in their own lives, don't have any interest in having a job in cybersecurity, to the people trying to get in the industry, fantastic industry. We've all had very unorthodox journeys in there and have loved every moment of it, really. Not quite true, there's always ups and downs, but overall it's a very rewarding career, and we recommend anybody who's thinking about making a switch to something that's going to be rewarding and lucrative, cybersecurity is the one for you. It's not going away, it's here to stay. So what we do on our social media, on our podcast, we try and share some insights into cybersecurity, make it more accessible, but also give you ammunition so you're equipped to kind of have these conversations about cybersecurity. The more you listen to this, the more exposed you are to cybersecurity, the better you're going to be as a secure individual or as a cybersecurity professional. So without further ado, welcome back. My name's Josh, and this is the CyberSpace podcast. So today we have a slightly different environment. If you're watching on YouTube, you've probably already clocked, where on earth am I? Have I had a complete makeover of my office? If I have, what on earth is that behind me over there? For those listening, I'm pointing at some very odd hotel decor because I'm currently at a work trip. I am in Southeast Asia supporting one of our a security conference for one of our clients. I'm going to be doing some incident response exercises tomorrow with them, which will be a lot of fun. I'm staying up a little bit too late right now doing this podcast on my own. There may be a little bit of background noise. This is not my ideal scenario. The voltage is different. So yeah, we've had a lot of fun trying to set this one up, but I do have something very good to share with you today, and I am on my own. I have not introduced a guest. That is not a mistake. I have not forgotten to introduce them. It's just me. It's Josh today. So, I am former security analyst, former threat hunter, current product specialist working within cybersecurity, and I really enjoy being on the cutting edge of cybersecurity trends and news stories and threat intelligence and so on. So today, I want to dive into a ransomware group profiling another threat actor who actually caught me a little bit by surprise. And by that I mean, I saw a news article that kicked this all off. It said, Lockbit have been knocked off the top spot as the number one ransomware actor. Now, that's a big statement, and I was like, okay, Lockbit, yeah, they've been kind of top dogs for a while. We've covered them before when we talked ransomware. Superb marketing. They advertise how quickly their product can encrypt. They have great customer support. They are a ransomware as a service outfit, so they specialize in malware development and ransomware development to help you kind of, once you've gained initial access, to actually establish your control, move laterally, steal data, and encrypt the machines, so you can actually then extort them or double extort them by making them pay back for the data that you've stolen and making them pay back for the encryption key that you've used to lock up all their devices. So Lockbit have been very popular for quite a while. They've been top of the heap, and as a result, that heat seems to have been what's unearthed them, or what's knocked them off there. So I'm not here to talk about Lockbit, but I will talk a little bit more about them. But really, I'm here to talk about the Play ransomware group. So when they said Lockbit were knocked off, who's replaced it is Play. And that's what made me think, hey, I should study these guys. I need to look into who these are, because I have to admit I'd never heard of Play ransomware, and it has been out there. Maybe it just missed me, it passed me by, and I'm not saying I know all the ransomware groups, and I wonder the person who really does know all of them, but that's quite interesting. I thought someone could leapfrog to be number one, and I haven't even heard of them. So that started me digging. Started looking at lots of security research out there. To name a few of the research pieces that I read: Huntress, CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1. I saw some stuff as well from a very excellent read up from vendor I hadn't really come across before. Avertium, who was a new vendor for me when I was doing some research. They did an excellent write-up, kind of consolidated a lot of the pieces there. which was great to have that all in one place. And normally I do piece these things together, try and give this complete timeline and complete story, because a lot of them are kind of news articles or individual research pieces that analyze a specific attack at a specific time, specific IOCs they were using there. And I wanted to create some sort of timeline for this ransomware group. How did they go from from nothing to now this month the top ransomware threat actor? And I did say this month, let's point that out, because our headline was sensational. The actual reality is it's only this month they've hit this top spot. But the reason for Lockbit demise, and the last few bits I'll say about Lockbit, we have been aware of ongoing targeting by the law enforcement agencies, particularly the FBI and the NCC and the NCA. A lot of the alphabet boys, as I know, some of the kind of joint efforts from the UK and Australia government as well have been targeting Lockbit. Lockbit have been a very prominent ransomware group, and I think that is part of what nation states and intelligence authorities need to do is go after, to show that, hey, you can't just be this kind of prominent shouting, yeah, we've encrypted everybody, yeah, we've got some of the best ransomware out there, and be untargeted, be unscathed. They've tried to take down the Lockbit group. Initially, it was taking down their dark web page, which had the list of all their victims. So this is where they would advertise saying, we've got these people, putting more pressure on them to pay up. Also where people will be able to kind of buy some of the data leaks as well, which helps them monetize it. So they took down that website and claimed to have taken some of the source code as well, so essentially rendering a lot of what the malware useless by sharing that source code, the indicators of attack, indicators of compromise, with security vendors. They can start building it into prevention controls and building it into their detections, or using it in their threat hunts. Ultimately, they shouted a lot about this. I forget the name of the operation, but it had one of those cool kind of names that only the FBI can attribute to missions that they do. But they knocked them down for a bit, and actually Lockbit reared its head very, very quickly afterwards, kind of put the website back online, said, they're overstating, they did barely anything to us, it is but a scratch, and they said they hadn't really got our source code, we're actually fine. They knocked us down a bit, it was our fault, we were a bit stupid, we left a vulnerability in a PHP module that we're using on the website, which allowed them to kind of take over full control of the web app that was being hosted, and allow them to gain some of these pieces. But they said, hey, we're actually fine, they've overstated it, it's a bit of a PR stunt type of thing. Well, fast forward a few months later, actually looks like February is when they tried to take them down. It actually looks like they might have been a bit more successful than Lockbit at least like to make out. They've now claimed to have captured and caught the leader of the Lockbit operation, Dmitry Koroshev. I believe I pronounced that correctly. Who they believe, 2 weeks ago, they've masked him, and they believe that this is the leader of the thing. Always difficult to be certain, and like many organized crime groups, if there is a kind of power vacuum, maybe someone else will step in, or maybe they'll go and rebrand this, and the Hydra's head will be reborn elsewhere. That is often the way it goes with these things. It's what we saw with Conti, the previous top ransomware group, as they kind of splintered off into different factions after their kind of dismantlement as the result of the chat logs that were leaked by a disgruntled Ukrainian member in response to their kind of allegiance to Russia during the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia ongoing conflict. So they actually seem to have had a bigger impact on Lockbit than realized, and Lockbit have tried to maintain this veneer of authority of you can't mess with us, we've got this, we are here to stay despite your efforts, law enforcement agencies. It turns out they're saying, we've still been compromising people. They've kind of released different victims again, but there's been some claims that they actually have been releasing people they've already compromised previously and kind of just double claiming them, so to speak, so making it appear like they're still active and they're still compromising, but actually it looks like the number of compromises has decreased massively. So people using the Lockbit ransomware, maybe the Lockbit group themselves, if they use it as ransomware as a service, has decreased, suggesting people are turning elsewhere, suggesting maybe people were scared. The fact that the FBI and so on were able to actually take down and claim they had the source code, they thought, hey, maybe let's just look elsewhere, right? There's too much heat on Lockbit right now. So to that extent, the FBI and the other alphabet boys have done their job. They have made them less viable as an operation, making them less profitable. And if they have took their leader, then that is going to be a kind of another big nail in the coffin, but not necessarily the end of a Lockbit. And potentially we'll be revisiting them again in a future podcast. We all love a comeback story. If it is a villain like this, though, the bad guys, the black hats, then we hopefully the comeback story does end with them getting their just desserts. But in this power vacuum that the Lockbit have left, we've seen Play has kind of risen to being the one that's been most observed in the month of April. So just the month of April is where they've kind of compromised. I think I mentioned that earlier. I'm not sure I finished that point, but that's an interesting one, right? It's slightly sensationalist. Are they really the top ransomware actor after 1 month of being on the top? I think that's very too early to tell. And but I wanted to dive into Play to work out, are they here to stay? Is this maybe a trend we're going to keep on seeing? Do they have some very capable tactics and techniques and procedures that they use, or is it just been chance that they've been used? What is their history? And so now we're going to talk about Play themselves, and the name even caught me off guard a little bit. It's slightly different to what you would expect a kind of criminal organization to call themselves, or to have been named. And interestingly, I'm going to kind of start with the reason why they're called that, because I could save it to the end, but I think this is very interesting. So Play, also known as Play Crypt, because whenever they encrypt your files on your machine, they change the file type to .play. So whatever your file was, say it was financial documents 2024, the .doc, that will become financial documents 2024 .play. So there's a little bit of fun about them here. They also do some equipment in them. They put some of their files in the kind of music folder, say, and the ransomware node itself doesn't say, hey, here's the ransom, you pay this. It just says Play. It's a little bit of almost reminds me of Saw, right? You want to play a game type of mentality. We do in the cybersecurity world, we do love the era of kind of vandalism hacking back in the 90s, early 2000s, where hacking wasn't really malicious. It was kind of done as a bit of a laugh, as a bit of a, hey, look how good I am, I got onto this. And you would deface something and kind of mess with them a little bit. So the Play has echoes of that, which is why I think I'm quite fond of that piece. And that's when I heard that's why they're called Play, I thought, actually, that's pretty great. And I'm sure they would have had half an eye that they thought they would end up being called Play. Sounds quite unimposing, right? But these guys are imposing. They have been pretty prevalent over the last 2 years or so. So beginning in June 2022, they have, up to October 2023, they exploited approximately 300 entities. So according to a joint security advisory from the FBI and the CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the Australian Signals Directorate Cybersecurity Centre. I should have just read the acronyms there. Cybersecurity is a global problem, and so we have joint global bodies taking these actions and sharing this information, which is great to see. It's the only real way in this kind of, and we're never going to get full global buy-in. You have state-sponsored actors who target people just financial gain. We've seen Russia kind of encourage attacks on the West, even from non-state-sponsored actors, but just say, hey, go mad. Why not? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, type of thing. But Play have been fairly prevalent. They impact a wide range of businesses and critical infrastructure in North America, South America, and Europe. This is kind of common. They don't seem to have any particular trend as to who they target, and I think that's typically the way that the world works. They are financially motivated. 92 or so percent, it's over 90% of actors of breaches are financially motivated, with the others falling into the kind of espionage category. They're not being a vandalism category really counted in those data anymore, maybe not being around at all. So anyone they can get kind of look for the vulnerable systems more than anything, right? And obviously they will look for some people who, if they're more profitable, the better for them, the more money they can get out of them. They initially were a ransomware gang in the full sense of the word, that they would use their own ransomware they developed. They would use their own techniques and get in. So that's what we're going to focus on initially, before we then see their kind of evolution later on, kind of post 2023, and we'll look at them in the present day and maybe why they're so common, so prevalent right now. So the 2022 June, we start seeing victims reporting attacks, and we see forums like Bleeping Computer start to kind of talk about these in the news. Straight after that, they attacked the Argentinian judiciary of Cordoba, which was, it's kind of a fairly big target, right? You're putting a big target on your back. If you're attacking the judiciary, there might be some sensitive information there. It might ruffle a few feathers. So in August 2022, they took that down. They had to shut down their entire IT systems and the online portal, and they were forced to resort to pen and paper, as we've often seen these ransomware victims have to do to kind of keep on going, keep the lights on while they try and restore systems and hopefully don't pay the ransom, because you should never pay the ransom. And actually had a great conversation with the CISO, CIO, Chief Information Officer today, who said one of his first speeches to people was, we aren't paying ransomware. No one is allowed to pay the ransom. And he had lots of different business units under his kind of global CIO role. And he said, if you're feeling concerned, if that makes you feel uncomfortable, then use that energy to go and actually take mitigations, put controls in place so that you won't get to that point of ransomware, so that you won't have to worry about that. Invest the money now rather than invest in money in the in paying a ransom. If the money is going to be spent later, might as well spend it now doing good security. I think we've seen a lot of that. The thing we covered, the British Library, we saw how much money they had to take out of their reserves, money they could have invested earlier, but they decided it was too expensive and too difficult to upgrade certain legacy systems, which ultimately were their downfall. So this kind of spend now to save later is real in cybersecurity, right? And I'm not saying spend absolutely everything you can. There are bounds. Budgets have to be pragmatic, but that is, I love that approach from the CIO rather, saying that we are never going to pay the ransomware. So let's start acting like that. And if we know we aren't going to pay, what action should we do to make sure we don't get to a point where we are ransomed? So now back to the kind of the compromise in Argentina. This was I talked about this one because I just think it was quite an interesting one. That the Argentinian publications called this the worst attack on public institutions in history. It was a fairly high-profile one that I must have missed when it occurred, and something that maybe could have put a large target on their back. But let's look at some of the tactics they use. I'm not going to just talk about that compromise in the judiciary. I just wanted to kind of show you a range of the kind of targets that they go after, some critical infrastructure as well as private organizations as well as public organizations. But let's look into some of the techniques that they use. And these group is quite interesting. This group, maybe the reason I haven't heard them is they claim to be, their commentary says that they are a closed group designed to guarantee the secrecy of deals. So rather than Lockbit, who are kind of advertising how great they are, these guys seem to favor a little bit of secrecy. Initially, you keep them the ransomware from themselves, and eventually moving into the ransomware as a service, as I alluded to earlier. Now, as we know, with ransomware is not a one and done attack. Ransomware requires a full attack sequence, kind of from start to finish. It can take a matter of hours. I think 24 hours are some of the kind of quick ones. It can take a matter of days. It can take weeks or months. Depends how kind of cautious you want to be, how low and slow you want to be while you're doing internal reconnaissance, so you don't kind of trigger any alarms. Or if you want to kind of do a bit more of a smash and grab, it depends what the appetite is within there. But either way, there is time between that initial point of compromise, them gaining entry or a way in to systems, unauthorized entry to those systems, for them to have to find the data that they need to exfiltrate so they can do that double extortion, for them to move into enough systems so that they can actually cripple the organization by deploying the ransomware payload. And to move into enough systems, you need to do things, and to find data, you also need to elevate your privileges, you need to move laterally, so you can install lots of persistence mechanisms. So all this stuff is what I'm going to kind of cover, the tactics that they favor, so we can get an idea of how they operate. And so they're most known for kind of three methods of gaining access to an organization. Now, the first, if you listen to last week's podcast, will be no surprise. It's using valid credentials. We saw from the Verizon DBIR report that is the most common entry method by quite a while, despite the rise of exploits in recent years. Credentials still remain the number one, because credentials, if you can find credentials and people set stupid credentials, sometimes they set default credentials, sometimes their credentials get leaked in the dark web, sometimes you can phish credentials, sometimes you can actually crack credentials or guess them as well. Once you do that, if you're able to do that without being detected, then you basically look like a legitimate user, you're able to log in. So it's very difficult to kind of block that. It's very difficult to detect that as being malicious straight off the bat as well. The next actions normally tend to be a little bit louder. So once they gain access, so the other methods for them to gain access are exploits. So there's two kind of notable ones. They seem to use two exploits in each. So there are two that they use two each. So the first one is focusing on 40OS, a VPN. virtual private network, which offers, which is often used to kind of secure access to certain assets within an organization, and things sit behind it. But actually, this thing can be targeted too. These things have vulnerabilities as well. It's not just credentials that need to get you in there. The FortiOS had a 2018 vulnerability that in itself didn't seem too crazy initially. This was used in 2022, so it's interesting that the 2018 vulnerability was still present and hadn't been patched in the VPN software. But the 2018 vulnerability allowed for an exploit to pull down pull information that was stored on the device. So actually to traverse pathways to a restricted directory using a path traversal technique, which then allows them to actually read arbitrary system files such as session file that contains usernames and passwords in plain text format. So what they've managed to get there is a username and password to kind of jump in. There's also if they are passwords that aren't stored in plain text, if they have taken some mitigations, then grabbing those kind of the password hashes, or kind of you can then take them offline and crack them offline, which means you're not going to trigger any alarms, and you can kind of try every possible combination against it until you kind of get lucky, or just get patient, or just patient. The second, but that alone might not get you in, right? We talked in the British Library Compromise about how important MFA is, multi-factor authentication, because if you guess someone's passwords, if they leak or whatever, or use an exploit like this, MFA means, drat, I can't actually get in because there's a second layer that I can't, and you can't really guess or brute force an MFA token in the same way you maybe could a password. But then there's a CV 2020-12812, which is also present in FortiOS VPN, that allows for bypassing of the authentication, the second authentication token. So essentially bypassing the MFA. So then with those compromised credentials, you got the 2018 vulnerability, the path traversal vulnerability. You can actually use that to just straight away get in access onto the VPN, and from there move into the organization. So that's the second method entry: compromised credentials, then 2 exploits on a VPN to gain credentials and gain access. The other one is the proxy not shell vulnerabilities. This is a very high profile one when it came out 2022 in the Microsoft Exchange, so Microsoft email server. There are 2 vulnerabilities that essentially allow you to chain the exploits. The first one allows for a server elevation privilege. So you elevate your privileges to a point where you can then use the second vulnerability to execute remote code to that same level of privilege. So you've got top access, you kind of administrator level privileges, and then you execute code. You basically can do whatever you want on that compromised email server. What they then do with these access, once they gain entry, they tend to run PowerShell on the compromised system to actually execute more code, actually use to start deploying persistence mechanisms. Some of the persistence mechanisms they use are actually using legitimate software, so things like Plink and AnyDesk and remote management software, and they can use that to maintain access, to maintain a backdoor, things that are used by legitimate IT users as well, so kind of hide amongst that activity. They also do things like anti-forensic techniques, so actually trying to hide their activities. They will turn off certain pieces of logging. They might delete logs that have been produced, or telemetry that's been produced, making my job as a security analyst a lot harder if I am to try and investigate how they might have gotten there, or maybe not even creating telemetry in the first place, so that I can't get that alert that would alert me to their presence, and allow me to kind of disrupt that attack and ultimately remediate it. They also use Cobalt Strike in the post-compromise, and System BC RAT, remote access Trojan, for persistence. So Cobalt Strike being a very popular penetration testing tool. It is a legitimate tool, but it has previously been compromised by attackers. There's less of it out there in the world now, but it is still it can still be used by threat actors, and it's basically a kind of Swiss Army knife for attacks and for kind of doing your actions when you gain access to an organization. The remote access Trojan, it similarly allows kind of persistence mechanisms, so something to communicate back to you and allow you to continue your actions. They also use living off a LAN binary, so lol bins as they're called, something we've talked about previously and talked about on our socials. Lol bins or living off LAN binary essentially don't drop files that are malicious, but actually drop files which then instruct living off a LAN attacks, so use legitimate binaries that already exist there to perform malicious actions. They were able to actually use this for like WinSP, so they could use the data exfiltration and task manager for local security authority service for dumping and credential cracking. So actually able to grab more credentials and start cracking those offline as well. So they're really gaining a real huge foothold in this organization, and from those additional credentials they might be able to move further into the organization. So they've either got compromised credentials from the initial exploits, or they've gained kind of admin access from the server elevation and privilege vulnerability. But then from then on in, they need to maintain elevated access within the organization to move further in. So this is one of the methods they would use for that. After gaining access to the accounts, they actually use the accounts as persistence mechanisms also. So especially if the desktop RDP process is disabled, or protocol rather, RDP is disabled on the victim's system, then they can't use things like AnyDesk or Plink, but actually they might disable it by executing the SSH commands, which establish inbound connects with the victim's server systems, essentially creating kind of shell access there. They also would use tools like Mimikatz to extract high privilege credentials from memory. So there's a variety of different techniques that they might use depending on, I've concluded all their techniques here, all the ones I was able to get hold of, rather than talk about them in specific individual hacks. Felt like that was a better way to do it, but kind of show that there's there are many ways to skin the cat here. There are many ways for them to gain access and gain persistence and gain elevated privileges, and they'll choose which ones make most sense given the circumstances and given what's available when they arrive when they achieve unauthorized access. There's also other ways they avoid detection. So they actually use a few tools, to name some of them: GMER, Gummer, IOBit, Process Hacker, and Power Tool to disable antivirus tools and other monitoring solutions. So it might be things that can block attacks, or things that send data to maybe a SIEM, that might create alerts or give telemetry for a security analyst to go and investigate. They actually can kind of wipe indicators that might be on there as well. So this is a common tactic used to hide their tracks. So they can maybe use these techniques again because people don't know about them, and also it's more difficult when you're doing that IR process to work out exactly what went wrong, so you can kind of rebuild these systems confidently without getting compromised again, if that's the route that you choose to go down, rather than, well, you shouldn't pay the ransom, but rebuilding can be a difficult process. They manage to make it as difficult as possible to rebuild, so you're more likely to pay the ransom. It's not just antivirus, they also seem disabling Windows Defender through PowerShell or command scripts, or EDR is also kind of covered off in some of these as well. They also, so once they kind of gain privileged access, they're in the environment, they want to look for data, so that there's sensitive data that they can exfiltrate out of there before they go for the encryption. The tool that I saw them using was Grixper, which literally just kind of find some of the data and exfiltrate it out of there. They tend to encrypt the files, kind of do them in batches and send them out slowly, so as not to kind of trigger any giant any anomaly alerts of mass data being pushed out. So they take a bit of their time there to make sure they don't get caught. I think at this point, if they've gone this far and they haven't seen any indications that they've been identified, they feel fairly confident, but they're still kind of playing a little bit safe. At which point they then will use WinRAR to encrypt the files. So some of this stuff you might be thinking, hey, WinRAR, hey, some of the stuff you said didn't sound crazy complicated. Maybe it was the way I explained it so well. But actually, they have been kind of, fingers have been pointed at them saying they're not that sophisticated compared to some other actors. So they're little, maybe simpler tactics, but hey, if it works, it works. And as we've seen, they've got a high number of victims, so I guess it is working for them. And it really matters with what you're trying to play against. If you can score a tap in, why try and do an overhead kick? Potentially miss. So I get it. It makes a lot of sense. So they've encrypted the files, they've exfiltrated the data. This is that double extortion model where they then say, hey, pay us to give you the encryption keys back, and pay us so we don't release your information everywhere. They, like I said at the beginning, though, they like to kind of play with their victims. That might be where this name has come, if you pardon the pun. But that ransomware note normally it would have a lot more details and kind of say, hey, here's what we've done, here's what we need you to do, here's our Bitcoin wallet, for example, here's the amount of funds you need to transfer within this time period, it's going to go up. That's one example. But they say, let's play, email us. Come talk to us. Let's have a discussion. It's a little bit more playful. It's kind of a little bit fun. I guess they maybe it's to entertain themselves. Maybe it's to create some sort of signature. I think people, even if they are trying to avoid, ransomware gangs or criminals are trying to fly under the radar, they still can't really resist a little bit of stroking of the ego and kind of creating a bit of an identity, so to speak. So that's their own tactics, and a lot of the stuff that we described was actually believed to be the ransomware group themselves doing these tactics, so gaining initial access, moving through the different steps, and then deploying the ransomware. And that might explain why some of it could be called simplistic. It's difficult to get complex and sophisticated steps at every different point of this attack sequence. There's probably going to be stuff where you think, hey, I don't really know a huge bit about living off the land attack, so I'll use some existing stuff that's out there. Or hey, I don't know much about initial access, so I'm just going to kind of fish people for their credentials, because I can't write exploits, but I can write phishing. Hypotheticals entirely, but it kind of that might be, if they're doing the whole thing themselves, they might be a smaller outfit, then that could be an explanation for it. In 2023, they kind of changed this model. There's evidence that suggests they went to ransomware as a service. Not evidence in the way that they were able to find them kind of selling this. So obviously on the dark web, it's not really that high profile where they kind of offer this service. But there were a lot of kind of attacks that were seen that kind of had very small variations. So people were basically using a kind of a pre-bought ransomware kit that had very similar tactics, that released files with very similar names or the exact same names and stored them in the same directories. It includes the public music folder they like to use, so /public/music, that directory offers to hide malicious files. They use the same password to create high privileged accounts, and both attacks and the same commands as well. So the same type of attacks. It's kind of like they've found a way to do it, and they're kind of perfecting that model and maybe selling it off to other people as part of this RSS service, but it's not confirmed. So as part of the next step to talk about is some of these similarities they're seen with other ransomware groups. So Play, they do have a lot of similarities here, and that's unsure exactly what that is. Maybe they're kind of affiliated in some way, maybe they're working together, or maybe it's just coincidence. You can only really speculate, but the tactics have been labeled as being very similar to ransomware groups Hive and Nokoyawa, leading researchers to believe that Play is operated by the same people who use similar file names and file paths for tools and payloads, like I mentioned. So maybe they are trying not to be the super famous Lockbit gang by actually pretending to be a bunch of different ransomware groups. Or maybe they've just earned different names by seem to be slightly different, and in their mind, they think, we would still Play. It's weird that you've kind of given us these three different names, but likely that's to do with different infrastructure they would have used to mount the attacks, as well as other different techniques, tactics and procedures that seem to be similar, but there seem to be enough differences for them to believe that they exist in different veins, or that also believe that they are operated by these same people or have some level of overlap. So I'm not really sure what to take away from that. I think it's maybe an interesting point that sometimes we might overcomplicate things in the cybersecurity industry, or maybe we might want to race to be, hey, we found something completely new, let's coin a new name for them, when actually we're looking at the same thing. Or maybe it is them trying to spread it out there and not attribute everything to the Play name, but also attribute it to other pieces as well. It's very difficult to say, but hopefully that offers up some insight into what how they might be thinking. So Trend Micro, one of the researchers I didn't mention at the top, so I'll mention them now. They also found evidence between another connection between the Quantum ransomware. So Quantum was known for being a splinter group of Conti. So after the Conti was kind of dissolved, when the chat logs were leaked and their very sophisticated organization was revealed, different groups formed different units. So different members say, hey, let's go do this. We've learned enough here. Let's go try it out. Or maybe it's do our own ransomware startup type of things. Quantum is known for employing their version of Bazaar Call, which was Jormungandr, which I don't think I've got time to go into right now, but they also hire people specialized in OSINT, so open source intelligence, to kind of find their victims and target them. Spamming, so a lot of kind of phishing attempts there, or bombarding. Design and call center operations. The call center operations is very much that kind of level of hey, this almost smells like a professional outfit we saw with Conti with their HR departments requesting holiday and things like that. The call center operations you're probably quite familiar with if you've seen. There's a lot of high profile kind of call centers around the world now that target people, not necessarily hackers themselves, but maybe just scammers who kind of calling up old people and trying to get them to send their money. That same model will exist for hackers, where they can kind of be trained on good documentation of how to take certain steps and scale out the operation with some great process documentation. Great, so I think that's my overview of the Play ransomware group. I didn't cover absolutely everything, but I wanted to make sure that shed some light on this group, which, tell me if I'm wrong, but I felt they're relatively unknown in the ransomware space. And while they don't show me anything that's hugely different beyond maybe the kind of playfulness of them with their naming conventions being called play, they haven't shown me to be anything that's hugely different from stuff we've already seen out there. I do think that maybe these groups are quite linked in some degree. Either they're in the same circles in the dark web, kind of sharing information. They're probably people of similar dispositions. They may even have worked together in Conti, which was kind of a really massive organization before it kind of split up. Or maybe there's some sort of information sharing, technique sharing, to kind of make it more accessible to people to get into ransomware, as they target different bodies, government bodies as well as non-government bodies. I don't know enough to say whether they are there are any state-sponsored links there, hence why I kind of stuttered, because I don't think that's fair to make that. I haven't seen enough data to suggest so. Yeah, at this point I'm unsure, but think there definitely may be some sort of link to the previous Conti group, or at least some sort of inspiration or homage paid to the success of Conti, which was kind of really thrown into the spotlight with the release of those chat logs. Okay, so hopefully this helps you understand a little bit more of what kind of threats out there. Your ransomware is one of the most important, or rather high-profile threats that are out there. All organizations care about ransomware. Every person who has to sign a budget knows about ransomware, even if they don't know how to configure MFA on a device, even if they have very little technical understanding themselves, they understand the threat of ransomware. So knowing about ransomware groups is very important, to make sure we can connect why we do things in security, as security analyst, or as blue teamers, or even as red teamers, anyone who's on the white hat, the good team, so to speak. So we can connect why we do certain things to the impacts of what would happen if we don't. And like I said at the beginning, like with that CIO who suggested that you should never pay the ransom, you're not allowed to pay the ransom. If you have that mentality, what steps would you take in your security program to make sure that you're never in a position where you have to pay a ransom? Because, as we always say, getting compromised is okay. It happens to everybody. It's happened to governments, it happens to cybersecurity companies. MITRE got compromised recently by a 0-day, very difficult to defend against a 0-day. It's okay to get compromised. What's not okay is not having a plan in place to recover from that, to be resilient, or to disrupt and contain it so that it doesn't get to a point where it really impacts you beyond a mere bit of inconvenience or panic. So hopefully that sheds some light. If you do want to dive into any more of the information, I do suggest you do some research out there. Some great papers by all the cybersecurity vendors that I mentioned that dive into some more information about the IOCs, indicators of compromise, indicators of attack that I discussed. I can't show you the strings on a podcast, although maybe that's somewhere we should go if you're watching on YouTube. I can start populating them up on the screen. Last bit from me before I sign off. This mic, not plugged into anything. Turns out the voltage in Southeast Asia is completely different. It was buzzing the whole time, but I felt weird not having a mic on a podcast, and I thought that it's something nice to look at. So I thought I'd a little Easter egg for anyone who's stuck around long enough that they can know that. And I hope the audio was good, because I have to record this off my laptop and my headphones based on what was best. But thank you very much for taking this is my first solo podcast. If you did like it, if you want me to make sure that I always get a guest on, I can get more organized, let me know. I'm more than happy to do that. If you did enjoy it, if you did kind of like this more of a narrative, it's a little bit of a story time for myself, if you enjoyed the Welsh tones coming through your airways, then I'll be more than happy to do some more like this again. But I do like having the insight from our other security specialists, Robbie, AJ and Vaughan, some of the SOC leaders and the incident response specialism that they have there. So thank you very much for listening. It's been another episode of the CyberSpace podcast by Empirical Training. If you know where to find us, follow us on the social medias. We have a school community if you do want to have high access to us and our learning materials that we've created to help people get into cybersecurity. And I think that's all I have to say. So, as Robbie would say, that's a wrap.